Welcome students. Today we will discuss theory part 2 from chapter 17, that is locomotion and movement. In today's session we will cover NCERT section 17.3, 17.4 and 17.5. This is disclaimer. So students, let's quickly look into our learning objectives for our today's session. So at the end of this session we will be able to understand the skeletal system in human thoroughly. Then we will be able to differentiate between skeletal division. At the end, we will learn about some diseases related to muscular and skeletal system. Let's see index for today's lecture. At first, we will cover skeletal system from NCERT section 17.3. After that, we will discuss the joints from NCERT section 17.4. Lastly, we will understand disorders of muscular and skeletal system from NCERT section 17.5. After discussion above mentioned topic, we will summarize our discussion in summary section. In NCERT based question section, we will discuss few important questions and their answer based on today's session. Next, in keynote section, we will get to know few additional information on today's topic. Lastly, in interesting question section, you will get few questions which will be solved by you. Let's start today's session by looking at the skeletal system, which is the framework that gives our body its shape and support. And we can say it's like the frame of a house, holds everything together, and our skeletal system provides structure and protection for our organs. Now notice that the skeletal system is made up of mainly two components, that are bones and cartilage. Bones are like the sturdy beams of building, giving strength and support, while cartilage acts like flexible padding or cushions between those beams, allowing for smooth movement and flexibility. This combination helps our body stay strong but also helps in the movement. Now let's compare bones and cartilage side by side. Bones are hard, mineralized and have a good blood supply, which means they can repair themselves if damaged. Now talking about cartilage, it is a firm but flexible and doesn't have its own blood vessels and can't repair as easily as bone can. So you can think of bones as the solid parts of a playground structure, while cartilage is like the rubber padding that makes movement safe and smooth at the joints. So each has its own special role in supporting, protecting and allowing movement in our bodies. So here you can see an image shows the difference between bone and cartilage. You can notice the structure and texture of each. Bones here look dense and solid, while cartilage appears smoother and more flexible. This kind of visual representation helps us understand why both are essential for our body's movement and protection. So in human adults, the skeletal system is made up of 206 bones. There's a lot of pieces working together. These bones come in different shapes and sizes, each with a specific job, much like the different parts of a car or we can say building. Now let's look at the main functions of skeletal system. One key function is providing structural support. The skeleton acts like the frame of a house, keeping everything upright and giving our bodies their shape. Without it, we would be like a jelly, unable to stand or move properly. Another vital role is protecting our internal organs. For example, our skull shields the brain and the ribcage guards the heart and our lungs. So it's like having a built-in armor to keep our most important parts safe from any kind of injury. Now, the skeletal system also assists in movement and locomotion. Bones here work together with muscles acting like levers and pulleys to help us walk, run, and perform all kinds of movements. So you can imagine your bones as the rigid parts and your muscles as the ropes that pull them up. Now, soft bone specially serves as a site of differentiation of stem cell into blood cells, and this whole process is called as hematopoiesis. Lastly, the skeleton stores most important minerals like calcium and phosphate. So these minerals are like life savings in a bank that is ready to be released into the bloodstream when body needs them for various functions like nerve signaling and muscle contraction. So students, observe the diagram. It's an entire human skeleton showing the skeletal system. So from this image, you can easily observe the different types of bones present in our body. Now let's look at this diagram. The skeletal system is divided mainly into two components, that is the axial skeleton and appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton with 80 bones form the central core of our body. Think of it as the trunk of a tree, including the skull, vertebral column, sternum, and ribs. The appendicular skeleton with 126 bones includes our limbs and girdles that attach them. So it's like the branches that allows it to reach and move. So altogether, we have 206 bones working together to support and move us. Now here is a diagram that visually shows the axial and appendicular skeletons. Notice how the central part of the body is highlighted for the axial skeleton while the limbs and girdles are shown for the appendicular skeleton. This image helps us connect the names and numbers from the table to the actual parts of our body. Now students, we are going to explore more about axial skeleton, which is a central part of our body's framework. The axial skeleton is made up of 4 major parts. It's just like the frame of a house that has key components. So our body's central skeleton has specific sections just like that. And here each one play or have a unique role. So let's break it down one by one. First, we have the skull. The skull here acts like the helmet, protecting our brain and supporting the structures of our face. So it's essential for keeping our most vital organ, that is the brain, safe from any kind of injury. Next is the vertebral column, also known as the backbone. You can imagine this as the main pillar or spine of a building. So it's not only support our body, but it also protects the spinal cord, which is like the main communication highway between brain and the rest of the body. The third part is the sternum, or we can say breastbone. This flat bone sits at the center of our chest and connects to the ribs. So you can think of it as the front anchor point that helps our rib cage stable and protect the lungs and heart. Finally, we have the ribs. The ribs form a cage-like structure around the chest, much like the bars of a bird cage. So they protect our heart, lungs from any kind of injury and helps us breathe by moving as we inhale and exhale. Now observe this image carefully. This shows the main component of axial skeleton. We can see 3 main components are skull, rib cage and vertebral column. We will discuss each about them one by one in details. Let's focus on skull first. Now a skull contains 8 cranial bones which collectively forms the main protective bony layer cranium for the brain. Okay, so it forms the cranium of the brain. Now next, the skull contains 14 facial bones which form the main facial structure of humans. Now let's talk about hyoid bone. So this is a single U-shaped bone located at the base of the buccal cavity, or we can say mouth area. What's unique about the hyoid bone is that it doesn't connect directly to any other bone. It's like a floating anchor for the tongue and muscles involved in swallowing, or we can say speech. Now, 3 very small bones are malleus, incus, and stapes, also included in the skull, which is collectively called as ear ossicle. So, these are the bone present inside the middle ear that helps in hearing. So, for 2 ear, we have in total 6 ear ossicles. If we add up all these bones, cranial, facial, hyoid, and ear ossicles, we will get a total of 29 bones in the skull. It's amazing to think that such complex structure is made up of so many individual pieces working together. This total is important to remember for exams and understanding human anatomy. So you can see here the human skull. You can observe each bone that we have talked about present in the skull. So you can always try to recreate this figure in your mind and correlate the concept that we have just discussed. Let's talk about vertebral column. So the main role of the vertebral column, it forms the main framework of the trunk, or you can say central part of our body. So you can imagine it like the backbone of the building, giving structure, support, so everything else can be attached securely. Another important function is protection. The vertebral column acts like a shield for the spinal cord, which is vital for our nervous system. It supports the head, much like a sturdy pole holding up a sign, keeping it balanced and safe. Remember, That the vertebral column is formed by the vertebrae that are placed along the back, or we can say dorsally. So you can think of these vertebrae as stack of building blocks, each one fitting on top of another to create a strong but flexible column. The vertebral column also serves as the attachment point for the ribs and muscles of the back. This is similar to how branches attach to the trunk of a tree, allowing for movement and support. These connections help us twist, bend, and move our upper body. So here you can see the picture of vertebral column, which helps us visualize how everything is placed that we have just discussed. So you can notice how the vertebrae are stacked and how the ribs connect to them. Let's focus on vertebrae. First, notice that each vertebra is considered as a unit of vertebral column. So you can think of vertebral column as like a stack of building blocks where each block is a vertebra. So these units are connected to form the strong but flexible backbone that supports our body. Now let's look at the structure of vertebra. Each vertebra has a central hollow portion called as neural canal. You can imagine this like a tunnel running through each block, creating a passageway down the length of the spine. Through this neural canal, the spinal cord passes. The spinal cord is like the main highway for messages traveling between the brain and the rest of the body. So the vertebra protect this delicate structure just like a tunnel protects a train as it moves through the mountain. The first vertebra has a special name. It's called atlas. The atlas is a unique because it supports the skull, much like the mythological figure Atlas who held up the sky. So this vertebra allows us to nod our heads up and down. The atlas articulates or forms a joint with the occipital condylosis of the skull. You can think of this like a hinge that lets your head move smoothly on top of your spine. This connection is crucial for head movement as well as flexibility. In an adult human, the total number of vertebrae is 26. Here's an image showing the structure of the vertebra. Take a moment to observe different types of different parts of vertebra that we have just discussed. So you can see here neural canal and the way the vertebrae here stacked together. So these kind of visual representation allows us connect. It helps us connect the concepts to what the vertebra actually look like in the body. Let's start by looking at how vertebral column is divided. It's not just one long bone, but is actually made up of different sections, each with its own function. This division helps her back be both strong as well as flexible. It's kind of like the segments in a bendy straw. First, we have the cervical region at the top, which contains 7 vertebrae. The first two, called atlas and axis are especially important as they let us nod and shake our heads, just like a hinge and a pivot in a door. So every time you say yes or no with your head, say thanks to your cervical vertebrae. Next is the thoracic region, which has 12 vertebrae. This is the most stable part of the spine because it connects to the ribs, forming a protective cage around our heart and lungs. So you can imagine this area as the sturdy frame of a shield keeping our vital organs safe. Moving down, we reach the lumbar region with 5 vertebrae. These are the largest yet strongest because they carry most of our body weight. So you can think of them as the foundation stones of a building, and they need to be tough to support everything above. Below the lumbar region is the sacral region, made up of 5 vertebrae that are fused together to form single bone called as sacrum. This bone connects the spine to the pelvis, acting like a bridge that transfers weight from upper body to the legs. At the very bottom, we have the coccygeal region, which is made up of 4 fused vertebrae forming the coccyx, or we can say tailbone. This is vestigial structure, meaning that it's a leftover from our evolutionary ancestors, like a tiny reminder of the tails our distinct relatives once had. To sum up, the vertebral column follows a specific formula, that is C7, T12, L5, S1, which is fuse, CO1, which is fuse. So this shorthand helps us remember the number and type of vertebrae in each region, and it's like a code that tells us how our backbone is built from top to bottom. So you can observe here the structure of vertebral column. So always try to recreate this image in your mind, as it will help you remembering the concept that we have just discussed. Let's focus on ribs. They are an essential part of our body's framework, protecting vital organs like heart and lungs. So, students, remember that there are total 12 pairs of ribs present in our body, which forms the rib cage along the vertebral column. Now, each rib is a thin, flat bone. So, you can imagine a rib as a curved, slightly flattened stick, strong but yet lightweight. So, this shape allows the ribs to provide protection while also being flexible enough to move as we breathe. Now, let's look at how the ribs are connected. Each rib is attached at the back or dorsally to the vertebral column, our backbone. So at the front or ventrally, most ribs connected to the sternum. From the back, we can say the vertebral column is connected through. From the back, the ribs are connected through the column, through the backbone. Or we can say ventrally or at the front, most ribs are connected to the sternum. So I'm talking about sternum. What it is? It is the flat bone in center of your chest. So this double connection forms a sturdy yet flexible cage. Let's discuss different types of ribs now. We have three main types of ribs. Among them, the first one is true ribs, consisting of first 7 pairs of ribs. That is why it is called as true ribs. And we will know shortly about, we will discuss shortly about why they are called as true ribs, false ribs, and floating ribs. Now, next are the false ribs, which include the 8th, 9th, and 10th pairs. Finally, we have the floating ribs, which are the 11th and 12th pairs. Now, students, you can see this diagram. It is clearly showing different types of rib in a rib cage. Where it is showing sternum, the structure of sternum, true ribs, false ribs, as well as floating ribs. Now, look at this table. It will give you detailed discussion of true ribs. Think about your rib cage, which is true bony cage around your chest. The top 7 bones of ribs are known as true ribs, which are unique because they are the longest and most stable, and they attach directly to the sternum. That is called as breastbone. And how they are connected? They are connected by a tough yet flexible material, which is called as cartilage. Okay, this direct connection makes these ribs less mobile, but also gives them the important job of forming a strong yet protective shield for the vital organs like heart and lungs, which is why they are also sometimes called as vertebrosternal ribs. So we have already talked about the structure of the ribs. It has mainly 3 kind of ribs, that are true ribs, false ribs, as well as floating ribs. And at the front, they are attached with the sternum via cartilage. Let's talk about false ribs. So think of the lower part of your chest where where last 3 pairs of ribs are, as having false ribs because they are false ribs because they don't attach directly to your breastbone like the ones above them. Okay, so unlike true ribs, they are not directly attached to breastbone. Instead, they connect indirectly using the cartilage of the rib right above them to reach the sternum, which gives this area a bit more flexibility. Though they are shorter and more mobile than the upper true ribs, these false ribs are also known as vertebrochondral ribs, and they still provide moderate protection for important organs located in the upper abdomen, such as the liver, spleen, and kidneys. So this indirect connection allows for more movement in the lower part of the rib cage, which is important for breathing purpose as well as body movements. Let's focus on floating ribs. Floating ribs, which are the last 2 pairs of ribs, that is 11th and 12th, located at the bottom of your rib cage, are called that because they don't attach to your breastbone at all. Okay. Unlike the other ribs that form a solid cage, these are shorter, less stable, and more mobile. With the front end simply ending in the muscles of your abdominal wall. So, despite being the most mobile and least stable, these vertebral ribs, as they are also called still play a crucial role by providing protection for important lower internal organs like the kidneys while allowing flexibility in your lower torso for activities such as deep breathing. So they are very important. Let's talk about sternum. The sternum is described as a flat bone located on the ventral midline of the thorax. So you can think of it as the central plank in the front of your chest, like the keel of a boat, providing support and protection for the organs behind it, such as the heart and lungs. Now let's bring in the rib cage. The rib cage is a protective cage made up of several bones that work together to shield our vital organs. So it's like the frame of an umbrella, giving both structure and safety to the chest area. Here we can see that the thoracic vertebrae, ribs and sternum work together to form the rib cage. So imagine these parts as the beams and panels of a sturdy shelter, all working together to protect the heart and lungs while also allowing for movement needed for the breathing. Let's discuss about appendicular skeleton. This is a major part of our body's framework, and it's a different. It is very different from axial skeleton, which includes skull and majorly skull and spine. So first, talking about this component, we have the limbs. These are our arms and legs as the part of appendicular skeleton. So you can imagine them as the tools our body uses to reach, grab, walk as well as run. Next, we have the girdles, the pectoral girdle and pelvic girdle. These act like strong bridges or connectors attaching our limbs to the main skeleton. Students, observe this image given here carefully. It is specifically highlighting the appendicular skeleton of our skeletal system. So you can try to remember this picture, as it will help you to correlate with the concept of appendicular skeletal system. Now we are focusing on forelimb, or we can say arm. Let's start by looking at what makes up forelimb. Our limbs have specific bones that work together to allow all kinds of motion. Let's break it down one by one. First, we have the main bone of the upper arm and forearm, the humerus, radius and ulna. The humerus is the single bone in your upper arm, while the radius and ulna are the two bones in your forearm. These bones are like the main beams in a crane, giving strength and structure to your arm. Next, look at the wrist. The wrist is made up of 8 small bones called as carpals. You can imagine these like the pebbles in a flexible bracelet, allowing your wrist to bend and twist in any direction. Now moving on to the palm, we have 5 metacarpal bones. These are like the support beams in a bridge, forming the base of your hand and connecting your wrist to your fingers. Finally, the fingers themselves are made up of 14 bones called as phalanges. Each finger has 3 phalanges except for the thumb, which has 2. So you can think of them as the segments in robotic finger, allowing precise and delicate movements. If we add up all these bones, we will get a total of 30 bones in each forelimb. This complex arrangement is what gives us our arm so much motion, our arm a wide range of motion and we can say movement. So it's amazing how so many bones work together to perform seamlessly. Now look into this diagram carefully. This image of bone, this is the image of bones that are present in a forelimbs. So you always try to remember this image, as it will help you in visualization the concept of appendicular skeletal system, or we can say upper arm, whatever we have discussed just now. Let's focus on appendicular skeleton, specifically the hind limb, or we can say leg. The appendicular skeleton, we know that these bones include, this skeleton includes the bones that helps us move, like our arms or legs. Let's start with hind limb, or we can say lower limb. It consists of just like we have, if we have car, just like the parts of a car work together to make it move. In similar way, our leg bones work together to support movement as well as balance. So our leg is built around 3 main bones, that are femur, that is thigh bone, which is body's longest and strongest bone, connecting the hip to the knee, and 2 bones in the lower leg, that is tibia, which is shin bone, and fibula, which is calf bone. The tibia is the larger and thicker of the two lower leg bones and is the primary weight bearer, while the thinner fibula runs alongside it and serves mainly to provide structural support to the lower leg and ankle joint. Together, these three bones create the framework that allows us to stand and walk. Next is the patella, commonly known as kneecap. It's a cap shape. It's a cup shaped bone that covers the knee from the front or ventrally. Think of the patella as a protective shield for your knee joint, helping to prevent injuries when you kneel or we can say fall. The seven tarsal bones are the blocky, irregularly shaped bones that form the ankle and heel area of your foot, and their main job is to provide a strong yet flexible support system. They are the foundation for the foot, helping to bear the body's weight and absorb the impact of walking, running, as well as jumping. Next, we have metatarsal bones, which are the five long bones in the middle of your foot, and they act like a long part of your foot that connects our ankle to our toes. Lastly, the phalanges, on the other hand, are the smallest bone that make up your toes. Just like your hands, you have 14 of them in each of your feet. Altogether, the hind limb consists a total of 30 bones. Okay, this number shows just how complex and well designed our legs are for movement. So remember, each bone has a specific role and together they make walking and running possible. So you can visualize the bones present in the limb in the given diagram. You just carefully observe here each bone in lower limb and their position through this picture. Now let's focus on girdles, that is pectoral. Mainly we have two girdle, pectoral girdle and pelvic girdle. These are the main structures that connect our limbs to the main part of our skeleton, and that is the axial skeleton. Let's look at the main function of these girdle bones. They help in the articulation or joining of the upper and lower limbs with axial skeleton. Okay. In other words, they act like connectors or hinges, allowing our arms and legs to move freely while while we can while we can while it stay attached to our bones. Now let's focus on the first type, that is pectoral girdle, also known as the shoulder girdle. This is a structure that connects each arm to the trunk of the body. So it's what gives our shoulders their shape and allows for a wide range of arm movements. The pectoral girdle is made up of mainly two bones, that is clavicle, which is commonly called as collarbone, and the scapula, which is the shoulder blade. Imagine the clavicle as a strut that holds the shoulder out from the body, while the scapula acts like a flat platform for muscle attachment and arm movement. Now let's talk more about clavicle. This is a long slender bone that sits horizontally at the top of your chest. So it's easy to feel just under your skin, running from the base of your neck out of your shoulder. The clavicle has two distinct curves, giving it an S shape. So this unique shape helps it absorb shock and makes it even strong yet flexible, much like a spring in a machine. So we often refer to the clavicle as a collarbone. It's a common term because it's so easy to see and feel, and it's one of the most frequently broken bone in the body, especially during falls. So you can see the structure of scapula and clavicle. Now let's focus on pectoral girdle, which is also known as shoulder region. This part of your skeleton connects the upper limbs to the trunk. Now let's look at the scapula. Scapula is a large triangular flat bone. So you can think of it like a sturdy flat plate that forms the foundation for your shoulder, giving it both strength as well as flexibility. Now notice where the scapula is located. It's found on the dorsal or back side of the thorax, especially between second and seventh ribs. So if we reach behind your back, you can actually feel the outline of your scapula beneath your skin. Now let's break down the different parts of scapula. Just like a building has different sections, the scapula has several important features that each play a important role in how our shoulder works. The first part is the spine of the scapula. This is slightly raised ridge running across the back of the scapula's flat, triangular body. So think of it as a supportive beam that adds strength and serves as an attachment point for the muscles. Next is the acromion. This is an extended, or we can say expanded, bony processes at the top of the scapula. So you can feel it at as the highest point of your shoulder. It acts like a protective roof over the shoulder joint and is where some important muscles do attach. Now let's talk about glenoid cavity. This is a special part of the scapula that plays a key role in arm movement. It's a shallow depression located just below the acromion. The glenoid cavity is basically a socket, or you can say cup-shaped depression right below the acromion. So imagine it as a small ball that will hold the head of another bone, allowing for smooth movement. This cavity is where the head of the humerus, or we can say upper arm bone, fits in. Together, they form the shoulder joint, which is like a ball socket mechanism. So this design let us move our arms in almost any direction, just like a joystick. So here's an image with of scapula, and you can visualize this to learn this structure or different parts of scapula. You can see acromion, you can see the structure of the structure or the location of glenoid. You can see the other parts of the other main parts of the scapula. Now let's talk about pelvic girdle, which is a key part of our skeleton. The pelvic girdle supports the weight of the upper body and connects the spine to the lower limbs. So you can think of them as the strong foundation of a building, holding everything about it steady and secure. Now let's start by looking at what pectoral girdle is made up of. It consists of two coxal bones. You can imagine these as two large curved plates that come together to form the sides of your hips. These bones are essential for supporting our body when we walk or stand. Now, each coxal bone isn't just a single piece. It's actually formed by the fusion of three separate bones, that is ilium, ischium, and pubis. This is important. It's like three puzzle pieces coming together to make a one strong structure. These fusion gives the pelvis its unique shape and strength. Now, the two halves of the pelvic girdle meet at the front to form the pubic symphysis. This is a small joint made up of cartilage that acts like a shock absorber, allowing some movement and flexibility. It's similar to how a door hinge lets the door move, but still keeps it attached. Now let's focus on special part of pelvic girdle called as acetabulum. This is very important. This is a deep cup shaped cavity that plays a crucial role in how our legs move. Think of it as the socket in a ball and socket joint ready to hold the head of the thigh bone. Now the acetabulum is located right at the point where the three bones, that is ilium, ischium, and pubis, fuse together. This spot is extra strong because it is reinforced by three bones meeting. Okay, so it's like the corner of a triangle where all sides come all together for maximum support. The thigh bone or femur fits perfectly into the acetabulum. This connection allows us to move our legs in many directions, just like how a joystick moves in its socket. So this joint is what lets us walk, run, and jump smoothly. So you can see the picture of pelvic girdle. You can see the structure of acetabulum. You can see ischium, ilium, and these are the important structures to remember in the pelvic girdle. Now let's start with the definition and importance of joints in our body. So you can think of joints as the connecting point that allow our skeleton to move, much like hinges on a door. Let's discuss in detail one by one. First, notice that joints are the contact points between the bones, or you can sometimes between bones and cartilage. So imagine the way two pieces of a puzzle fit together. Joints are where these pieces meet, allowing for flexibility as well as movement. So without these contact points, our skeletal would be rigid and immobile. Now let's highlight why joints are so important. They are essential for all types of movement, whether it's walking, running, or even just waving your hand. So you can think about how a door can't open without its hinges. Similarly, our bodies can't move without joints. Now let's look at how movement actually happens. Movement through joints is carried out by force, which is generated by our muscles. So you can picture muscles as the engines that pull on the bones, causing them to move at the joint, just like pulling on lever to lift something. Now, during movement, joints act as fulcrums, or we can say axis of rotation. This means they serve as the fixed points around which bones move, similar to how a seesaw pivots around its center. So you can emphasize that this fulcrum action is what allows for efficient and controlled movement in our body. So you can see this image. You can here notice how the bones, muscles, and joints interact to produce movement. So take a moment to observe how joints serve as the pivot point and how the muscles generate force to move the bones. Now let's talk about the different types of joints in our bodies. So we have already discussed that joints are like the hinges and connection that let us bend, move, and twist. So there are mainly three types of joints. First, we have fibrous joint. They are like the tough, immovable seams that hold certain bones tightly together. For example, the bones in your skull are connected by fibrous joints, which keep your bones safe by not allowing any movement between between the bones, between different bones. Next, the cartilaginous joints. These joints allow movement for a little. These joints allow a little bit of movement and act like shock absorbers. So you can imagine the disc between your backbone. These are cartilaginous joints that help you bend and twist while protecting your spine from any kind of impact. Finally, we have synovial joint. These are most flexible as well as common joints in our body, like knees, elbows, and shoulders. Synovial joints are like well-oiled hinges, allowing us to run, jump, and throw with ease. So you can see this image showing different types of joint. So notice the differences in how they connect bones and allow movement. These kind of visual representation helps us why each type of joint is suited for its specific job in the body. Now let's start with the special kind of joint in our bodies, which is called as fibrous joint. These joints play an important role in connecting bones, especially in places where strength and stability are more important than movement. So let's read in detail. Now notice that how fibrous joints are formed. They involve the end-to-end fusion of bone. This is very important, that held tightly together by dense fibrous connective tissue. So you can think of this tissue like a super strong glue, or you can say thick rope that binds the bones together, making sure they stay firmly in place. Now, an important feature of fibrous joints is that they do not allow any kind of movement at all. This is why we call them immovable joints. So you can imagine two bricks cemented together. Once they are joined, you cannot move them separately. So this lack of movement is crucial for protecting certain parts of our body. A great example of fibrous joint is the sutures of the skull. These are the zigzag lines you might have seen on a model or a picture of a skull. These sutures tightly connect the bones of the skull, keeping our brain safe and protected, especially as we grow from babies into adults. So notice this is the picture showing the sutures of the skull. So you can notice the way the bones fit together like the pieces of a puzzle joined by the fibrous tissue. So let's talk about cartilaginous joints, which are a special type of joint in our bodies. These joints play an important role in how our skeleton moves and supports us. Let's talk in detail. First, notice that in cartilaginous joints, the bones are joined together with the help of cartilage. So you can think of cartilage like a firm but flexible cushion that connects the bones, kind of like the rubber padding between the tiles that helps them stay together but allows a little bit of movement. Now let's look at how these joints function. Cartilaginous joints permit only limited movement, which means that they are slightly movable. A great example of cartilaginous joint is the joints between the vertebrae in our backbone, or we can say vertebral column. These joints let us bend and twist our backs, but not too much, which helps protect our spinal cord while still allowing us to move. So again, here you can see the structure of a cartilaginous joint between the vertebrae. Now notice the cartilage acting as a cushion between the bones. So these kind of representations helps us understand how these joints provide both support and small amount of movements in our body. Now let's explore synovial joints, which are special type of joint in our bodies. These joints are essential for movement and flexibility. Now first notice that synovial joints are defined by having a fluid-filled synovial cavity between the surfaces of two bones. So you can imagine this cavity is like a tiny sealed bag of oil between two moving parts in a machine. So this space is what sets synovial joints apart from other types of joints like those in your skull, which are fixed and don't move. Now let's focus on this fluid inside that cavity. This synovial fluid just acts like a oil in a car engine. It lubricates the joint, reduces friction as the bones move against each other. This is why our joints can move smoothly without grinding, or you can say wearing down very quickly. Now, because of this special arrangement, synovial joints allow for free movement of the bones. They are what we call freely as movable joints. So think about your shoulder, or you can say knee, which can be which can move in many directions. So without this setup, our movements would be stiff and limited like a rusty wrench. So take a look at this diagram of a synovial joint. You can notice the space between the bones and the fluid filled cavity, and this visual helps us see how all parts fit together to allow smooth, flexible movement. So always remember this picture. So let's look into different types of synovial joints in human body. We have already talked about it. Synovial joints are like the hinges and swivels that our skeleton moves smoothly. That let our skeleton move smoothly. Now first look at the ball and socket joint. This type of joint is found in our shoulders and hips. So you can imagine a joystick that can move in almost any direction. That is how freely these joints let us move our arms and legs. This wide range of motion is what let us swing our arms in circle or kick a soccer ball. Now next we have the hinge joint, which is found in our knees and elbows. Think of a hinge joint as like a door hinge. It only opens and closes in one direction. So similarly, hinge joint allowed movement in just one plane, just like bending and straightening your arm or leg. So this design gives us strength and stability for actions like walking and lifting. Now let's talk about pivot joint. A good example is that joint is the joint between the atlas and axis vertebrae in your neck. So good example of this is the joint that is present between the atlas and axis vertebrae in your neck. This joint is acts like a rotating wrench, letting you turn your head from side to side as if you are shaking your head to say no. So it's a small movement, but it's essential for something for looking around. Now, moving on, we have the gliding joint, which is found between the carpal bones in your wrist. Imagine sliding two flat surfaces over each other. These joints allow small sliding movements, helping your wrist bend and twist. This flexibility is what lets you write, type, or play the piano. Another important type is the saddle joint found between the carpal and metacarpal bones of your thumb. Picture two saddles fitting together at right angles, and this unique shape allows your thumb to move in many directions. That is why we can grasp object and perform precise tasks with our hands. So we have already talked about this picture, which shows location of different types of synovial joints. So let's start with the diseases of muscular and skeletal system. First, we will cover myasthenia gravis, which is a condition related to movement and muscle function. This is an important example of how our immune system can sometimes affect the way our bodies work. First, notice that the myasthenia gravis is called as autoimmune disorder. That means the body's own defense system, which is supposed to protect us from germs, mistakenly attacks parts of our own body. It's like a security system that start targeting the people it's supposed to protect. Specifically, this disorder affects the neuromuscular junction. So think of neuromuscular junction as the tiny bridge where nerve cells communicate with muscle cells to tell them when to move. So when this bridge is damaged, the message from the brain can't get through properly. As a result, people with myasthenia gravis experience muscle fatigue, weakness, and sometimes even paralysis of their skeletal muscles. So imagine trying to lift something heavy over and over. Eventually, your muscles will get tired. So in this disease, even simple movements can become exhausting because the muscles aren't getting clear signals. As you can see the image that helps illustrate what's happening at the neuromuscular junction in myasthenia gravis. You can notice how the connection between the nerve and muscle is disrupted. So these kind of visuals will help us understand why the muscles become weak. Okay. So that was an autoimmune condition. Now let's focus on muscular dystrophy, a condition that affects how our muscles work and move. This is an important topic in understanding how our bodies rely on healthy muscles for movement. Now let's start by looking at what happens in muscular dystrophy. It's a progressive degeneration of skeletal muscle, which means that the muscles that helps us move get weaker over time. This usually happens because of genetic disorder, so it's something people are born with, not something that they can catch. Now a key player here is a protein called as dystrophin. Think of dystrophin as a protective shield for muscle fibers, helping them withstand the stress and strain when muscles contract. Without this shield, muscles are much more likely to get damaged during everyday movements. In muscular dystrophy, the body can't produce enough dystrophin or sometimes none at all. So imagine trying to build a house without right materials. Eventually, the structure starts to fall apart. In a similar way, muscles begin to degenerate because they lack this crucial protein. As a result, people with muscular dystrophy experience progressive weakness and loss of muscle function. Everyday activities like walking, climbing stairs, or even lifting objects become harder over time. This highlights how important healthy muscles are for our daily lives. So you can see this picture which is showing the condition of muscular dystrophy. Now let's talk about tetany, which is an important concept in the study of movement and muscle function. Let's examine what tetany actually means. It is a serious neurological condition. So you can think of it as a problem with the body's wiring system where nerves are sending too many signals to the muscles, causing trouble. Notice how tetany is characterized by rapid muscle spasms. These are wild, involuntary muscle contractions, almost like the muscles are glitching or shortcutting. So imagine your hand suddenly clenching up without wanting it to, and that's the kind of spasm we are talking about. So let's look at what causes these spasms. Tetany is usually triggered by the electrolyte imbalances in the body. Electrolytes are like the body's electrical wiring fluid that and they help nerves and muscle communicate properly. These are when these are out of balance, the signals get mixed up. Now, most often, low blood calcium levels happens. So here you can see that image that illustrates tetany in action. So notice how muscle contraction shows this, these kind of visual helps us understand how dramatic and visible these spasms can be in real life. So let's talk about arthritis, which is a condition that affects our joints and can make movement difficult. Arthritis is a common issue, especially as people get older, and understanding it is helps us appreciate how our bodies work when and what can go wrong sometimes. Now, first look at what arthritis means. It is basically inflammation of bony joints. Imagine your joints as hinges on a door. When they get inflamed, it's like the hinges getting rusty and swollen, making movement painful and stiff. Now, there are two types of arthritis. So, in the table, notice how arthritis is described as degenerative joint disease caused by wear and tear. So, think of it like the tires on a car wearing out over time. Talking about rheumatoid arthritis, it is on the other hand, it is an or we can say autoimmune disease, which means that the body's own immunity or we can say immune system mistakenly attacks the joint linings almost like friendly fire. So we can also see that arthritis usually affects weight bearing joints like we can say knees and hips, while rheumatoid arthritis tends to affect symmetrical joints like both the hands or wrist. So pay attention to the differences as they are important for diagnosis and treatment. So we have an image that visually compares two types of arthritis. So take a moment to look at how joints are affected in each condition, and these kind of images make it understandable how the condition affects in real life. Now talk about osteoporosis, a condition related to the bones. This typically is important because it connects what we learn about the skeleton to real life health issues, especially as people age. Now, notice that osteoporosis is described as an age related disorder. This means it tends to develop up as people get older, much like how our hair turns gray or our skin changes over time. It's a natural part of aging for some, but it can be dangerous or it can be serious effect. It can have serious effect on health as well. Now let's look at what actually happens in osteoporosis. It gets characterized by decreased bone mass and increased porosity, which means the bones become less dense and more like a sponge with holes. So you can imagine a sturdy brick wall slowly uh, turning into a wall of Swiss cheese. That's how bone lose their strength in this condition. Now, because the bones become weaker and more porous, the chances of fractures go up. Everyday activities like bending over or even cuffing can sometimes cause bones to break. This is why osteoporosis is a major concern for older people, as it can lead to serious injuries from minor accidents. Now, one of the main causes of osteoporosis, especially in postmenopausal women, is decreased level of estrogen. Estrogen acts like a protective shield for bones. So, when its level drop after menopause, bones lose that protection and become more vulnerable. That is why women are at higher risk after a certain age. So, here you can see. And compare healthy bone to osteoporotic bone. Notice how osteoporotic bone looks much more porous and fragile. So these kind of visuals helps us understand why bones affected by uh, osteoporosis and are more likely how they are more likely to break. Now let's talk about GOT, which is a condition related to your joints and movement. It is an important example of how our body's chemistry can affect the way we move and feel. Let's explore more about it. First, notice that the GOT involves inflammation of the joints. This happens because uric acid crystals build up at the joint spaces, almost like tiny needles poking into the tissues. So you can imagine sand getting into hinge and making it hard and painful to move. That's a similar to what happens in GOT. So GOT most commonly affects the big toe, specifically the first metatarsophalangeal joint. This is often called as podagra. So think about how much we use our big toe for walking and balance. When this joint is inflamed, even simple movements can become extremely painful. Now let's look at the risk factors for developing GOT. These are the things that make someone more likely to get this condition. Now some major risks include obesity, eating a diet high in purines, which are found in food like red meat and seafood, drinking alcohol, taking certain medications, and being male. These factors can cause the amount of uric acid in the blood, leading to crystal formation. It's a bit like adding more and more sugar to water until it can't dissolve anymore and start to form crystal. Now let's talk about symptoms. GOT attacks usually come on suddenly, often at night, and causes severe pain and redness, swelling, and warmth in the affected area. So you can imagine waking up with your toe feeling it's like on fire, and that's how intense the pain can be. So it is characterized by sudden severe pain, redness, swelling, and warmth in the affected joints, often at night. Now that covers the basics of GOAT, what it is, where it happens, and who are at risk. So we have seen the different disorders of muscular and skeletal system. So this is the summary. So today we discussed that human skeletal has 206 bones and cartilages, which are further divided into axial bone that consist of 80 bones, and appendicular skeletal that are composed of 126 bones. Then we talked about skull has 22 bones with 8 cranial and 14 facial bones, plus the hyoid bone and ear ossicles. Now we also discussed about vertebral column, which contains 26 vertebra and 12 pair of ribs connecting to the sternum. Then we talked about limb. Each limb has 30 bones, including major bones like the humerus and femur, plus the smaller bones in hands and feet. Then we talked about bones are connected by mainly three types of joint, that is fibrous joint, cartilaginous joint, and synovial joints. At last, we talked about some common skeletal disorders including arthritis, osteoporosis, muscular dystrophy, and GOT, as well as myasthenia gravis. Now, this is NCRT. This is first question of NCRT based question, and the question is which of the following statement about vertebra is incorrect. So here option number C, that is humans have 8 cervical vertebra, is the incorrect one. Okay, let's see the answer in detail. Now we know that humans, like almost all mammals, have exactly 7 cervical vertebra. So think of cervical vertebra as the building blocks of your neck. No matter how, no matter if it's tiny moose, if it's a tiny moose, or you can say any tall tower, mammals almost always have 7. So this is a great example of how evolution keeps certain features consistent across species. This number 7, that is 7 cervical vertebrae, is highly conserved in mammalian evolution. That means it stayed the same for millions of years, even as mammals have evolved into different shapes and sizes. So it's like a family tradition that almost never changes, no matter how different the family members become. Now let's look at the whole vertebral column. It consists of cervical, that is 7, thoracic, that is 12, lumbar, that is 5, sacral, that is 1 fused, and coccygeal, that is 1 fused vertebrae. You can think of these as the different neighborhoods along the spine, each with its own number of houses. So remember, these numbers helps you understand how the backbone supports and protects our body. So this is, you can see the structure of vertebral column. Now we have question 2, and the question is uh, a patient shows symptoms of muscle fatigue, weakening, and eventual paralysis. Tests reveal an autoimmune condition affecting neuromuscular junction. Additionally, the patient has low calcium levels leading to muscle spasms. So, which combination of disease or disorders is the patient suffering from? So, I've already discussed about it, and the answer is myasthenia gravis and tetany. Let's see the answer in detail. So, talking about myasthenia gravis, it is an autoimmune disorder. So, think of it like think of it like the body's defense system accidentally attacking the communication bridge between nerves and muscles, making muscles weak and tired. So, over time, this can even lead to paralysis, just like broken telephone lines stops messages from getting through. Tetany is a rapid muscle spasms due to low calcium levels in the body fluid. So you can see that the diagrammatic representation of myasthenia gravis, how it affects the neuromuscular junction, and you can see the tetany action, how it causes muscle spasms. Now this is question number 3, and the question is consider the following statements about the vertebral column. We have given 4 statements. As is first statement 1, all mammals have exactly 7 cervical vertebrae. The second one is the first vertebra, that is atlas, articulates with the occipital condylosis. Third one is neural canal allows passage of the spinal cord, and fourth one is total number of vertebrae is 33. Which of the statements are correct? So here I guess option C is correct, which is 2 and 3. Yeah, let's see the answer in detail. So statement 1 says all mammals have exactly 7 cervical vertebrae. This is actually true. Whether it's a tiny mouse or a, we can say, tall building, almost all mammals have 7 bones in their neck. It's fascinating example of how evolution keeps certain features consistent across very different species. Now let's look at statement 2. The first vertebra is called the atlas, and it's specially shaped to connect with the occipital condylosis at the base of the skull. This joint lets us nod our heads up and down, just like a hinge on a door. So statement 2 is also correct. Statement 3 is about the neural canal. So think of the neural canal as a tunnel running through each vertebra, forming a protective passageway for the spinal cord. So this is like a highway for nerve signals traveling between the brain and the rest of the body. So statement 3 is also correct. Now statement 4, the total number of vertebrae in humans is 26, not 23. Not is 26, not 33. So our option 2 and 3 are only correct. So you can see the picture of vertebra and the main regions. Now this is question number 4, and the question is, with respect to the rib cage, which of the following pairs is correctly matched? I guess option number D is correct. Let's see the answer. Yeah, option D, that is 8 to 10 pairs. That is bronchochondral ribs. Okay, so vertebronchondral ribs are correct, and these are 8th and 10th pairs. Let's see the answer in detail. So the 8th, 9th as well as 10th pairs of ribs are called as vertebronchondral ribs, or sometimes we can say false ribs. So think of these as the ribs that take a detour, that they don't go straight to the sternum like the upper ribs, but instead connect indirectly. This indirect connection is important for the flexibility and protection of our chest. Now the false ribs are unique because they don't attach at a directly to the sternum. Instead, they join the seventh rib through a type of cartilage known as hyaline cartilage. So you can imagine this like a side road emerging into a main highway rather than going straight to the destination. This arrangement gives our rib cage both flexibility as well as strength. So to put all together, the first 7 pairs are called as true ribs because they connect directly to the sternum, while the 11th and 12th pairs are called as floating ribs since they don't connect at the front at all. So it's like having some ribs with direct roots, some with shared root, and some that don't connect at the front. Each type here serves a different purpose in protecting our organs. So you can see the structure of ribs and the location of true rib, false rib, floating ribs, and sternum. So these are some interesting facts about this chapter. So human body, talking about human body has 206 bones. We just covered it, including 6 tiny ear bones that are 3 in each ear, essential for hearing. On the other hand, femur is the longest bone, while the hyoid bone is in the throat is uniquely unconnected to the other bones. Now, all mammals, regardless of neck length, have exactly 7 cervical vertebrae. This is a very interesting fact. A human skull consists of 22 distinct bones, 8 cranial plus 14 facial. Now, the 11th and 12th pairs are called as floating ribs because they don't directly attach to the sternum or breastbone. So, think of them as the loose ends of the ribbon, providing some protection, but they also allow flexibility in our lower chest. Now, the pelvis consists of 2 coxal bones, each formed from 3 fused bones. So, this is the last fact of this chapter. So, these are some interesting questions for you to solve and to check if you understood the fundamental concepts of this chapter or not. So, you can screenshot it. So, after completing the whole lecture, try to solve these questions by yourself. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope this session was helpful.